Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Commander Legends Battle for Baldur Gate spoilers. So I know it's the weekend, but spoiler season never stops, and we got a ton of sweet stuff to talk about today. Really, we had a couple of somewhat slow spoiler days over the last couple days. This was a big one, a ton of stuff. Wizards trying to get the rest of the legends out there, the rest of the backgrounds. So we got a huge day, which means we should probably jump right into it. Start talking sweet new cards. Before we do, two quick reminders. Number one, if you need some Commander Legends cards, you can get it from our amazing sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Number two, if you want to keep up on all the latest spoilers throughout the day, you'll find them all over at MTGPreviews.com. Oh yeah, and if you want more Commander content, make sure to check out the MTG Goldfish Commander YouTube. Anyway, let's talk sweet new cards from Commander Legends Battle for Baldur's Gate. First up today, we got a new ridiculously named rule legend in Raggadragga Goreguts Paws, a 4-mana 4/4 human boar. It's a legendary creature. It says each creature you control with a mana ability gets +2/+2, so a lowered 4 mana dorks essentially. Whenever a creature you control with a mana ability attacks, untap it, so pseudo vigilance, you can get in with your now big mana dorks and then spend the mana post-combat main phase, and then whenever you cast a spell, if at least 7 mana was spent to cast it, untap target creature, it gets +7/+7 and gains trample until end of turn. So Raggadragga, it's essentially a mana dork lord. If you're playing this, you're probably filling your deck with Llanowar Elves and Incubation Druids and Circle of Dream Druids, making him big with Raggadragga, maybe even attacking with them thanks to his lord status. And then if you cast big things, you can make your mana dorks even bigger. While Raggadragga works well with any mana dork, it works especially well with a couple of mana dorks that make mana equal to their power. Morrowind, Viridian Joiner. If you get Raggadragga down, you're pumping their power, which means they're going to make even more mana. And then if you cast big spells, you can make them super huge and make a ton of mana, which is pretty cute. The other shenanigans you have with Raggadragga is essentially making things into mana dorks. Like Ashaya is going to turn all of your creatures into forests, which gives them a mana ability, so then they're going to get pumped by Raggadragga, or like Cryptolith Rites. Creatures you control have tapped to add a mana of any color, so all your creatures are going to get +2/+2 thanks to Raggadragga. We've got another new version of these effects coming in Baldur's Gate in Jaheria, Friend of the Forest, which essentially turns all of your tokens into Llanowar Elves. So I think that's the plan for Raggadragga. Not a whole lot to say here. Essentially, you play it, you play a bunch of mana dorks, you make them big, smash your opponent. If you're tired of your opponents calling your mana dorks dorks, Raggadragga's a way to fix that. As far as Jaheria, kind of a cute card for a token deck. I'm not super excited to play it as my commander, but in Jetmir or Chatterfang or Reese or Ginny Fae, this essentially gives you a Cryptolith Rites on a body, which is kind of sweet if you do want to build around it as your commander. There's a couple of backgrounds that work with the token plan. Cloakwood Hermit can give you repeatable tokens. Veteran Soldier might be the best. Go into a Selesnya token deck, and then you get your own personal version of Adeleine essentially in your Jaheria once you get Veteran Soldier down to make a lot of tokens, which can make a lot of mana. So a pretty interesting card. Again, mostly hyped to play in the 99, but a fine lower power token commander as well. We also got a new dice rolling legend, Wyll, Blade of the Frontiers, and this is kind of exactly what you want for a dice rolling deck. 2 mana 1/1 human warlock. Whenever you roll 1 or more dice, instead roll that many +1, and you get to ignore the lowest roll. And when you roll dice, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it's a choose a background commander. So Wyll, this is another legend that I'm mostly hyped to play in the 99. It's essentially a Kirk's Thumb or a Barbarian class or a Pixie Guide, which is exactly what you want if you're playing a dice rolling deck. Like, the more dice you can roll and the more control you have over your dice rolling, the better your deck's gonna be. You get around the variance of rolling dice if you just can roll a whole bunch of them and ignore your bad rolls. So Wyll is great in any deck that's about rolling dice. Mostly I have to play it in like Delina, Farhide, Vondrus, whatever new sweet dice rolling legends we get in Commander Legends 2 Battle for Baldur Gate. As far as building around it as your commander, the only issue is, I don't know, there's not that much dice rolling stuff. I guess you can choose a background and be 2 colors. Mono red dice rolling, you just don't have a lot of options, and we don't have a background yet that cares about dice rolling. So I guess you can combine it with any random background and just be any 2 color combination, which is sweet. But again, mostly hyped to play this as a Carrick's Other Thumb on a body in the 99 of literally any dice rolling commander, and it's gonna be super great there. We also got our Esper Lord in Bane, Lord of Darkness, 4 mana 5/2. Once your life total gets down to equal or less than half of your starting life total, so 20 or less in Commander. It's indestructible, and it says whenever another non-token creature you control dies, target opponent may have you draw a card. If they don't, you may put a creature with equal or lesser toughness from your hand onto the battlefield. So this is a pretty interesting Esper Aristocrats commander. It does have that Punisher text, where your opponent's going to be the one making the choice. Like, when one of your non-tokens die, your opponent's going to get to choose, okay, do you have a lot of cards in hand? Am I scared of you putting something big into play? How high was the toughness of the creature that died? If they're scared of something big coming into play from your hand, then they're just like, okay, draw a card, which is fine. It's still a win. On the other hand, if it's a really little creature that died or your hand's empty, then they're going to be like, well, go ahead, put a creature into play. So it's not quite draw a card whenever a creature dies because your opponent has control. But honestly, most of the time, either one of these options is going to be good. The reason to be hyped for Bane is Esper somehow, oddly, doesn't have a great Sacrifice or Aristocrats commander. If you look on EDH Rec and see what Esper legends are most commonly played as an Aristocrat or Sacrifice deck, it's actually Sephris or Naveneral, neither of which actually really cares about Aristocrats. So Bane is doing something unique, and that's something I want to see out of my commanders. When it comes to Commander Legends products, is I want to see unique things, colors doing things that they really didn't do before, and Bane does do that, and it does it in a pretty powerful way. Plus, Esper's a pretty good Aristocrat color. Being in black and white gives you some more blood artifacts like Cruel Celebrant. You get a bunch of recursion in white, Sun Titans, Rally the Ancestors. Blue, I guess, I don't know, gives you counter spells. It doesn't really do anything specifically with the Aristocrat plan, but it is a very powerful support color because no other color gets good counter spells. You get Cyclonic Rift and whatnot. So I can imagine Esper Aristocrats being pretty good with this card. The other way to build around this is toughness pumping. Remember, this cares about the toughness of your creature that died. Well, you can use things like maybe Hold the Gates, which all the gate cards get so much better thanks to the new gates in Baldur's Gate itself, but you can use something like Hold the Gate to massively pump the toughness on your creatures. Normally, just pumping toughness isn't that good because you want to be pumping attack most of the time, power, so you can get in more damage, but in a Bane deck, pumping your toughness a lot is really insane because then if any of your creatures die, you're going to be able to slam really big things into play from your hand, which essentially means Bane's always going to be draw a card when a creature dies, which essentially means you build your own Harvester Souls in the command zone. If your opponent's always choosing to let you draw a card, that's still insane. It kind of reminds me of Yawgmoth almost. You need a sacrifice outlet. Yawgmoth does that itself, but Yawgmoth is such a great way to refill your hand. I think Bane can be something similar in the right decks. So I really like Bane quite a bit. I think it feels like a strong Aristocrat commander, and I love that it's in a color combination that could really use a card like this to lead Sacrifice in Aristocrat decks. We also got a new Azorius legend, which personally I think is kinda dull. The Council of the Four, which for some reason costs 5 mana, is a 0/8 and cares about tubes. I don't know what's going on with this card. So it's a 5 mana 0/8 legendary human noble. It says when a player draws their second card during their turn, you draw a card. And when a player casts their second spell during their turn, you make a 2/2 white knight creature token. So really, I think the reason this card's a little bit dull to me is it's just kind of a generic good stuff card. There's not really much building around it. I guess you can make sure that during your turn, you're drawing 2 cards, at least, and casting 2 spells, at least, to trigger it. But really, there's not much pushing you in a direction with this card. You kind of just play whatever good Azorius cards you want to, and I guess it's fine. Like a less powerful Grand Arbiter, just kind of good stuff, annoy you a little bit. Maybe a fixed Grand Arbiter is a good way to look at it. I guess as far as actually trying to synergize with this card, all I can really come up with is like playing Howling Minds, Dictated Crew fixes to make sure your opponent's drawing 2 cards during their turn, and then you're going to be drawing 4 cards each turn cycle, which is kind of nice, although you're also doing a little group hug stuff where your opponents are also going to be drawing extra cards, which maybe they use to kill you, or maybe they don't care because you're letting them draw extra cards with the Howling Mind and Dictated Crew fix. So I don't know. If I'm missing something about the Council of the Four, definitely let me know in the comments, but for me, probably the most boring of the rare and mythic legends we've seen from Commander Legends Battle for Baldur Gate so far. As far as non-legends, we got some really weird ones today, including probably the strangest Panharmonicon ever printed, Mirror of Life Trapping. So 4 mana artifact, it says when a creature enters the battlefield, if it was cast, exile it, and then return all other permanent cards, exile with Mirror of Life Trapping, to the battlefield under their owner's control. So on its base level, this is kind of like a really weird Panharmonicon that impacts everyone. So how this works is, let's say you cast a Muldrifter. Your Muldrifter's going to enter the battlefield. You're going to draw 2 cards, and then it's going to go to exile. And then when the next creature enters the battlefield, it's going to let you get your Muldrifter back, and then that creature is going to get exiled, and that's going to keep happening as long as Mirror of Life Trapping is on the battlefield. So would you play this in a Panharmonicon style deck? Maybe. It is risky because remember, you're also letting your opponent reuse their enter the battlefield triggers. So it's kind of like group hug Panharmonicon in some ways. I would consider trying it, although I don't know how good it's going to be. It also can work kind of like a hate card in some scenarios, depending on what card you're hating on. So let's say your opponent casts a big Craterhoof Behemoth. Mirror of Life Trapping, not going to do that much. Your opponent's still going to get the Craterhoof trigger. They're not going to get the Craterhoof itself, but the ATB is what really matters. On the other hand, maybe your opponent's trying to play Gishath's Sun's Avatar as their commander. Your opponent casts it, it's going to go to exile unless your opponent has mana to cast another creature. Then their Gishath's going to be locked away for a turn. So it can kind of work as really odd removal. It also works in a really interesting way with old school ETB exile a creatures like Fiend Hunter or Faceless Butcher. If you stack your triggers properly, you can stack it so your Fiend Hunter comes into play and it's going to put a trigger to exile a creature onto the stack, but you can have the mirror trigger resolve first so the Fiend Hunter is gone, and essentially the creature that Fiend Hunter's trigger exiles is going to be gone forever. So there's some shenanigans there. Maybe more importantly, this is one of the only cards in all of Magic that can permanently get rid of a commander. And by permanently, I mean really, truly permanently. So this card might actually discourage people from playing their commanders in a weird way. Let's say you got a sweet Atagatog deck, and you're like, okay, I'm going to play my Atagatog. So you run out your Atagatog, Mirror Life Trapping is going to trigger, and it's going to go to exile. And you're probably going to say, sure, go to exile, thinking, okay, next time someone plays a creature, I get my Atagatog, which is fine. Like, that's probably how you should play it. The problem is, let's say someone has a Beast Within, and before another creature comes into play and frees your Atagatog, they blow up the Mirror of Life's Trapping. Your Atagatog is gone forever. You already chose to put it into exile with Mirror's ability rather than to the command zone, and when Mirror goes away, you don't get another choice to move it from exile into the command zone. You already made that choice. So in a really weird, strange way, this can actually be extremely permanent commander removal, and I'm kind of curious to see how people are going to play against this. Like, once this is on the battlefield, it's definitely risky to run out your important cards, especially your commander, because there is a risk that someone's going to have the right removal spell and really punish you by exiling it forever. So Mirror Life Trapping, I love this card. It's one of the weirder, wackier cards we've seen from the set. I'm excited to try it in Panharmonicon decks. I think it might be good enough, and then you get all those other weird shenanigans as well. We also got perhaps the best card from the set, just as far as staple level cards, and that is Archivist of Oghma, a 2-mana 2/2 flash halfling cleric. This is when an opponent searches their library, you may gain a life and draw a card. And I gotta say, before we talk about the commander stuff, I think people are gonna try this in Legacy. We haven't seen much from the set so far that really screams Legacy or Vintage playability, but this might have a chance. 2-mana 2/2 with flash, decent enough stats, and remember, in those formats, people are playing a lot of fetch lands, so there's a lot of searching in the library going on. A lot of decks have 12 fetch lands in their mana base and just a handful of real lands to fetch out, so there's a pretty good chance this is at least going to draw you a card, maybe 2 cards, and if you're drawing like 2 cards off of this, it's a really powerful effect. As far as commander is concerned though, I think this might just be a new white staple. It hits on a lot. So it hits on green players. Every Ramp of Cultivate, Nature's Lore, gonna draw you a card, gonna gain you life. Also, of course, hits on fetch lands. If you want to, you can even combo with it. Field of Ruin actually forces each of your opponents to search their library. There is no option to say no to this. So your opponents are each gonna have to search their library for a land, and you're gonna draw 3 cards and gain 3 life on it. And plus, you get a land from Field of Ruin as well. So there's really no downside there. So there is some combos if you can force your opponent to search their library. Same with like Scheming Symmetry. You also hit on any tutor effect. Scheming Symmetry forces someone to search their library. Of course, there's a downside. Your opponent's gonna vampire tutor something to the top of their library, but still you get a little extra bonus there as well. And if you can use Scheming Symmetry politically, target the person behind, or make sure they're getting something that's not gonna hurt you too much, it still could be a huge upside. So I think that this is just a staple level card in most playgroups. The main exception would be, I think that the lower power your playgroup is, the worse Archivist gets. If no one's playing fetch lands, no one's playing the powerful tutors, you don't have a lot of green players in your playgroup, then this just isn't gonna trigger very often. But in medium to high power playgroups where people are playing those cards, I think this is the new Esper Sentinel, the new Opposition Agent, basically something that you can jam into any single white deck and probably get a lot of value off of. Like, even think about Esper Sentinel. How many cards do you need to draw with a 1-mana 1/1 to make it worthwhile? The answer is probably, what, 2, 3 maybe, and you're super happy. And then you also have the upside that sometimes no one deals with it, no one pays for it, and you draw like 10 cards and you just win. Archive is kind of the same. Like, is it 2-mana 2/2 with flash? It's not like you need to draw 10 cards for this to be worth it. If you draw 2 or 3 cards, that's already an absurd source of card advantage in white. And if you get this down on turn 2, that's going to happen. The green players are going to be ramping, people are going to be cracking fetches, people are going to be tutoring, and you're going to refill your hand really quickly. It is a little weaker off the top in the late game, but that's the same with Esper Sentinel. In the late game, when everyone's got a ton of mana, people are just going to pay for Esper Sentinel anyway. So I think that this is a new stable. When we look at the EDH Rec rankings of white cards a year from now, I expect this to be a top 10 card, maybe, just something that a ton of people are playing. So really powerful new card, and maybe one of the only cards we've seen so far that might have a shot in a format like Legacy, although we'll see if it's actually good enough. My guess is people tried in Legacy. Whether or not it's actually good enough is a generic card in like Death and Taxes or something. Kind of skeptical, but maybe people build around it can find a way to force their opponents to search their library or punish them, and then I think it gets way better. We also got Gale's Redirection, a 5-mana instant that says exile target spell, then roll a d20 and add that spell's mana value. If you get a 1 to 14, you can cast the exiled card for as long as it remains exiled, spending mana of any color. If you get a 15 or more, you get to cast the exiled card for free without paying its mana cost. So Gale's Redirection, I think it's the best of these steal your spell counter spells we've ever seen. We have like Spelljack, Desertion, Kairu Spell Snatcher. I think that Gale's Redirection is just better than all these cards. It's a little bit cheaper than Spelljack. Desertion only works with artifacts or creatures. Gale's Redirection works with any spell. However, I'm not sure that being the best of these cards actually means that Gale's Redirection is all that good. The problem with cards like Spelljack and Desertion is not that they're lacking in power. Like, it is super powerful to counter your opponent's big thing and get to cast that thing maybe for free. The problem is it's really, really tough to play 5-mana counter spells. That means you gotta leave up 5 mana during your opponent's turns. And if your opponents don't cast something that's a good target, you get really punished tempo-wise. So I think, considering that Desertion, Spelljack don't really see any play at all, they're like 1%, 0% on EDH Rec, I don't think this is really a staple level card. I think if you do play it, you probably play it for fun in some sort of a theft style deck, like Sen Triplets or Dragonlord Slumgar. So it's a cool, like, flavorful theme card. If your goal is to beat your opponent down with their spells, with their creatures, it's gonna fit really well there, but I still think it's gonna be an especially powerful card. So if you're trying to build like the optimal build of Sen Triplets or Dragonlord Slumgar, I don't think you're gonna play Gale's Redirection, but if you're playing like a medium low powered version and want to play it for fun, it is a really cool effect to be able to steal your opponent's spell and then beat them down with it or whatever. So I like the card. It's just 5 mana. It's too much mana to leave up in most decks. We also got a weird red enchantment in Descent into Avernus. 3-mana enchantment says at the beginning of your upkeep, put 2 Descent counters on it, and then each player creates X treasure tokens, and Descent into Avernus deals X damage to them, where X is the number of Descent counters on Descent into Avernus. So this is a card that I think is pretty bad. If you think about how this plays, you play this, the next turn you go to your turn, you're going to get those 2 counters, you're going to get 2 treasures, everyone's going to take 2 damage, but each of your opponents are also going to get 2 treasures, and then the next turn, going to take 4 damage, everyone's going to get 4 treasures, and then 6 damage and 6 treasures. So this snowballs out of control really quickly. The problem with cards like this is it impacts every single player. So what this really means is on your upkeep, you're making the first upkeep 2 mana worth of treasures for you, but 6 mana worth of treasures for your opponents. And then it gets worse from there. Like, once this has 4 counters on it, you're giving your opponents 12 mana, you're getting 4 mana. So your opponents just benefit so much more than you do from this card. So I think that it's going to take a really specific deck to make this good enough to see play. So where could this potentially actually work? And I think answer one is Vazzy. Seems actually pretty good in Vazzy, because Vazzy is all about giving your opponent treasures. And even though Descent to Avernus is giving your opponent a lot of treasures, I mean, that's kind of what Vazzy wants to do anyway. So if you want to play Vazzy, Group Slug, or whatever, seems like a sweet option. Also kind of interesting with commanders that just care about damage. Like, Nihab the Eternal. Yeah, it's a bummer that your opponent's going to be getting all these treasures, but you're going to be dealing so much damage to your opponents every turn, which means so much mana for you that you kind of break the symmetry of it anyway. Like, sure, you guys got a few treasures, but I'm going to make a ridiculous amount of mana with my Nihab and just combo off and win the game. Or like Rakdos. Rakdos, you're going to get probably the max discount on your creatures every single turn and try to combo off or cast Big Eldrazi or something. So that could be a possibility. Also, maybe some Staxy decks. Like if you're playing Abash and can double the damage, this turns into a fast clock. If this is hitting for 4 the first turn, 8 the next turn, 16 the following turn, this can wipe out the table really quick. Same with like Torbrand. Torbrand also adds some extra damage to it. Not quite as much as Abash, but if you're playing Torbrand, you get all these other Staxy painful enchantments as well. So I could see at least trying it there. Although I am a little worried that you give your opponent all those treasures and they're going to be able to use them to deal with your Descent into the Avernus or deal with your Torbrand or blow up all your stuff. So Descent into Avernus, I think in most decks, this is basically stone unplayable, but in the right deck, if you're a Group Slug deck, if you care about giving your opponents treasures or have some sort of weird Staxy damage plan like Torbrand does, then I think it's a pretty interesting option. We also got Blood Money. Blood Money, ridiculously expensive Wrath, 7 mana, blows up all creatures, and for each non-token creature, you get to make a tapped treasure token. So this is kind of like Decree of Pain for treasures. The thing is, Decree of Pain kind of slipping in popularity. If you look at like EDH Rec, it's down to 3%, when I think this was like a true staple, and I've seen this in my own commander decks as well. I used to always play Decree of Pain in every single black deck. Now I play it on occasion, but it's not a card that's a staple for me anymore. I feel like commander's just gotten so much faster that even though blow up everything, draw a bunch of cards, blow up everything, make a bunch of treasures is a really powerful effect, it's just too slow. You don't want your Wrath to be 7 mana, 8 mana. You do all this work to try to get to it, and then it gets Spell Pierced or Swan Songed, and it's just like a complete blowout. I want to be Toxic Deluging or Damnationing, playing these cheaper Wraths. So I think that as a Wrath, Blood Money's a little bit sketchy. On the other hand, one card that's kind of similar to this that does see a lot of play is Brass's Bounty. Brass's Bounty for 7 mana at sorcery speed just makes a treasure for each land you control. Of course, the downside is Blood Money makes tap treasure, so you can't like combo off, chain your stuff together, you know, storm off and win the game with Blood Money because your treasures are going to be tapped. On the other hand, it's probably going to make roughly as many treasures as Brass's Bounty much of the time and sweep the board. So even though you gotta wait a turn to get the mana, if you're playing a treasure deck, Agnes or Prosper or Vazzy, then I think this could be worth it. It's like a bad Wrath that's actually an absurd source of treasure production. So I think that's why you play. You play this because it can make a lot of treasures, and then the bonus upside is you Wrath the board. Rather than playing this in your Toxic Deluge slot or Damnation slot, play it in your Brass's Bounty slot or a slot similar to that. I think that's a role of this card. Also, another really easy way to win the game with Revel and Riches, like 10 creatures on the battlefield, cast this, get to your upkeep, you should just win the game. Whether the treasures are tapped or not doesn't really matter with Revel and Riches. So Blood Money, it's an interesting card. I think it's pretty bad as a Wrath, but if you care about making a ton of treasures, it actually does that pretty well despite the treasures being tapped. We also got one of my favorite new Panharmonicon or Blink cards in a long time, Lae'zel's Acrobatics. 4-mana instant, exile all non-token creatures you control, then you roll a d20. If you get a 1 to 9, return all those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control to begin the next end step. But if you get a 10 to 20, you immediately return all those creatures to play, and then you exile them again, and then you return them again on the next end step. So Lae'zel's Acrobatics, it kind of is reminiscent of like Semester's End, Ghostway, Eerie Interlude, these cards that can exile your entire board, and then put the cards back into play later. So one use of these cards is Wrath Protection. Like you blink your entire board with the Wrath on the stack, your stuff doesn't get blown up. So it can work like that. The more exciting use of this is reusing your ETB triggers. If you can high roll with this card, it's kind of insane. What this really says is if you high roll, trigger all the ETBs of all of your creatures, and then exile them, and then trigger all your ETBs again the next end step when they come back into play. If you have a Panharmonicon or a Yarok or something on the battlefield, that's going to be absolutely absurd. That is just so much value. Imagine all the Muldrifters and Cloud Blazers and Eternal Witnesses coming back into play multiple times. You're just going to have the biggest pile of triggers and do the craziest things. So I think home number one, I'm going to play this in all my Panharmonicon decks. If I got white mana, it's going to be great. Also, really good in Blink decks. Braga, Rune, Lagrella. Also, sneaky good in General Tazri. That's another place that, like, goes to way in Eerie Interludes you play, because a lot of allies have ETB triggers. So you play the allies, and then you blink them all, and then they all come back into play. If you can high roll with Acrobatics, with a Tazri deck with a bunch of allies, there's a decent chance you're just going to win the game that turn with this huge stack of ally triggers. Also, sneakily good in Renar, the Everwatchful, just because it cares about stuff going to exile, and this is a way to get stuff into exile multiple times, so an easy upgrade there as well. And as I mentioned before, the floor is, you use it as Wrath Protection. 4 mana, a little bit much for Wrath Protection. We got 2 mana Grand Crescendo. We got often free Flawless Maneuvers, so just fizzling Wraths, there's better options, but that is one of the upsides. You play this to reuse your ETB triggers, but then you also, as a bonus, get a bad Flawless Maneuver that you can use to save your board. So Lae'zel's Acrobatics, this is my kind of card. I love ETB triggers. I love Panharmonicon style decks, and I'm expecting to play a lot of this card because it is just so good at what it does, especially if you can get a little lucky and high roll. We also got an interesting new adventure equipment in Great Axe. So Great Axe has a instant speed steal sweep mode, which gives a creature you control double strike until end of turn, and then you can cast it after its adventure as an equipment for 3 mana, and the equipment's 2 to equip, and says when the equipped creature attacks, double its power until end of turn. So Great Axe, it's basically critical hit mixed with Mr. Orfello's trigger. Also, another comparison is something like Fire Shrieker. If you think about doubling a creature's power, it's essentially double strike, so you could compare Great Axe very closely to Fire Shrieker, although there is a difference worth mentioning, which is it actually stacks with Fire Shrieker. Let's say you somehow got 2 Fire Shriekers on a creature. Double strike twice doesn't do anything. You don't get quadruple strike because you have double strike 2 times on a creature. On the other hand, if you have Fire Shrieker and the Great Axe, then you kind of do get quadruple strike because you can double the power and you're still going to get double strike. So that's one of the upsides, is that it can actually stack with double strike, and it can kind of do this by itself one time. You can cast the instant mode to give something double strike, and then play and equip the equipment to give it double its power and get a ton of damage. So as far as the homes for this card, equipment decks, especially Voltron-y equipment decks, are probably the most obvious answer. Wylith, Blainer, Velduk. If you're trying to build one big crazy creature, double strike and double power on an equipment, which is synergizing with your stuff, seems pretty good. Maybe an even sneakier home, though, is going to be double attack trigger commanders, like Urchin, for example, or Wolfgar. With either of these cards, if you can go through all modes of Great Axe in one turn, you actually one-shot someone with commander damage. So let's go with Urchin because it has less power. You have Urchin, you take and give it double strike, and then you play and equip the Great Axe, you go to combat, you attack. Urchin's going to double trigger your Great Axe, so it's going to go from 3 power up to 6 power up to 12 power, so you're going to have 24 power thanks to the double strike plus double power from Great Axe. Of course, you might need some trample thrown in there to make sure you kill someone, but the same thing works with Wolfgar. Like, this can be a one-shot kill. It is a lot of mana. You need 2 plus 2 plus 3, so you need 7 mana altogether, but something to keep in mind with these attack decks. Plus, remember, Urchin and Wolfgar, they let anything double trigger, so it's not like you got a one-shot with your commander. You can put this on some evasive threat and do the same thing, so I think that's another sweet home. So Great Axe, first time we've ever seen an adventure equipment, and it's a pretty sweet one if you're an equipment deck or some sort of aggro double up attack trigger extra combat style Boros deck. Finally today, got a bunch of lower rarity legends. Not gonna go through all of them. I did want to mention Raynar in specific though, not because it's a great commander, a 4 mana 2/4 Dragon Artificer. This is dragons in artifact spells can be cast as though they had flash, or you may cast them as though they had flash. Not everyone. I don't think you'd play this as your commander, but I could see it showing up as like a weird Leyline of Anticipation or Valdelkin Ori in dragon decks, maybe in some artifact decks as well. So worth keeping in mind. The rest of them probably going to just fill out limited for Commander Legends too. We also got one more background in Street Urchin, which is actually kind of a sweet one. 2 mana, red background that says commander creatures you own have pay 1, sack another creature artifact, deals 1 damage to any target. Yesterday we were talking about Shadowheart and how it's a really sweet sacrifice commander or threatened tribal commander, but we didn't have a great background to pair with it. I think this is the perfect one. Now you can have Shadowheart to sacrifice creatures, plus you get this cheaper sacrifice mode that you can use even if Shadowheart is tapped, so you can take and steal your opponent's stuff, sack it, or just play straight up aristocrats where you're sacking your own stuff. Also kind of interesting with token producing background commanders like Abdul Adrian can make a bunch of soldiers, then you can sacrifice those soldiers for a bunch of damage, so worth keeping in mind, I think, as a sweet sacrifice outlet in the right deck. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Commander Legends 2 Better for Baldur Gate spoilers for today. So what do you think? Which of these cards are you most hyped for? What are you building? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back on Monday, I believe, with some more Commander Legends Battle for Baldur Gate spoilers. So until then, have a spectacular day, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.